a research funding organization, we encourage our researchers to take on co-produced work because of several advantages. For example, it improves the quality and diversity. It helps to address eminent issues that policymakers are grappling with. Sometimes for political purposes, it helps in terms of the sense of ownership as a project site for acting on the research findings. Co-designed or co-produced research is likely to be more impactful, and I think that is why institutions like PEP have taken it on. But we need to know that co-production comes with some challenges and risks. For example, it is expensive. It involves significant personal expenses both to the researchers and the funders. It also can be compromised to some extent, especially if policymakers are working with the researchers. They could drive the direction of the findings. So credibility issues can arise out of this. The research process can also be significantly affected. Therefore, we need to be cautious when we talk about co-production, but it's definitely a very important way to take on current research.
At Hewlett, we have several decades of experience investing in partnerships between national researchers and government officials. We've learned that these partnerships have tremendous potential to go right and result in tangible improvements in government programs and policies, and also, frankly, potential to go wrong and waste the most precious resource we all have, our time. So what makes a difference? Well, one factor is the ability and willingness to invest in long-term relationships and collaborations. First-time collaborations can go right, but we find that the 4th, 7th, 10th collaboration is almost always higher impact than the first. We also find that long-term relationships pay off at really important moments, like in the COVID-19 response, when we see government officials turning for help to people they already know and already trust and who already understand the programs. Second is being willing to have upfront conversations about what both sides need and what they can offer, and equally importantly, what they cannot. When both parties have an honest conversation about the constraints up front, really increases the chances of finding something that's a good fit and not wasting time if it's not a match. We see lots of more funders supporting collaborations between governments and researchers. This is hugely valuable. But what I'd love to see even more of is funders who are really supportive of putting the needs of the government officials first and of providing governments and researchers with the leeway and empowerment to shape research questions towards both short-term policy questions and long-term government needs. This is very, very powerful, more so than a research agenda that a funder can cook up in a place like California or London.
Co-production from the beginning helps to identify the gaps from the government's perspective, and hopefully the research that comes out of it is filling that gap, and that will help maybe to make it useful at the end for policymakers. Yes, so research funders have a role to play, right? Because a lot of the work that goes to supporting government and policymakers are not necessarily top of the line research work, they typically go unfunded, right? Because it's seen as something that either the government should do or somebody should be doing it, but they still need a lot of contribution from researchers, right? And providing funding in order to be able to support those activities is very, very important.
The objective of the Think Africa Partnership is to promote strengthened economic policy making across the Africa region. And one of the principles that we work with is one of promoting the idea of homegrown knowledge and home-owned knowledge. So knowledge co-production is a very valuable way in which local stakeholders can be engaged from an early stage in the research process. But for new evidence to turn into economic reforms, and economic reforms that really stick and take hold, it's important that they are internalized and owned by the countries that are adopting them. And so here there's a very important role for the interface between the knowledge community and the policymaking community to actually interrogate these ideas, to assimilate these ideas in a country context, and ultimately for these ideas to emerge as ideas of the country. And in many ways, the importance is much clearer to us than, for example, the role of economic papers being published in the top-ranking American journals. That evidence might prove to be very important, but the process by which that percolates through to the policymaking community may be much more indirect. Whereas those engaged in the domestic knowledge community are likely to have a much more direct line to these kinds of policy advisors, to be immediately able to put things in the terms that are relevant to them and to the policy debates that are happening at the time, and so are more likely to be called upon, sometimes at very short notice, but called upon to inform those discussions.
Experience with research co-production through collaboration between government and academia is that it can be challenging because the two often have different perspectives and objectives. It is, however, achievable and often results to real impact. And 50% of all PEP projects have been used to inform policy in one way or another. It requires adaptation, compromise, and training to better understand the needs and constraints of each other.
The topic and question facing all of us working for more justice and more equality and inclusion in our societies is a critical one. How can knowledge bring us together? And how can knowledge advance our common goals? So the MasterCard Foundation is working across Africa right now, and we recognize that knowledge is a really important piece of unlocking the solutions to the crisis and challenges facing young people across Africa. This has never been more critical than in the COVID era. So I really want to encourage all of you to think, critically about how we can come together as various knowledge brokers to answer some of the critical policy questions facing the generation ahead.